Welcome back to another one of these walkthrough models, and this one's a little bit of a walk down memory lane, but we'll get into that. So the model of today is this RC balsa-wood glider, and the memory lane bit is that I built this a long time ago in high school, and in fact I found the plans online. The company here called Aeroflight actually was based in Adelaide in South Australia, where I grew up, went to high school, and I'm not there now, but obviously I have family members still there. So it was really amazing to just have these memories flooding back after a couple of decades or so. Anyway, I found the plans and built it, and in doing so, it's actually a really cool exercise in many different techniques to make this as parametric and robust as possible, and also to mix a few interesting things, because there's a fair bit of hand crafting, shaping of things that go on this model in real life, and how do you replicate that in parametric CAD? So that was the real challenge of this. And just like yesterday's video, I'm going to highlight a couple of things that are very new and very cool in Onshape, just to set the foundation. We're at release number 182 now. It released yesterday, Friday, June the 7th, and so let's get going. All right, so there's a couple of documents at play here. The first one is the wing, and that's a different document, and so let's go and open that document and have a quick look at that first. Now, the wing is done as all-in-one part studio, mainly so that I could just make this as parametrically driven as possible. You see, as typical, and I like to have high-level variables to capture things like the span and the chord and the position of the spar. All of these things are variables, and I actually show in the description to myself what are acceptable ranges or safe ranges, and in this case it's not a safe range, just to keep that here. I'm not trying to make a completely generic wing creator tool here. I'm actually going back to model this one, right? So it is 1600 millimeter wingspan. It's got X number of ribs. Anyway, and a certain sort of sweep, like a 5-degree sweep back. But in doing so, even doing so, it makes sense to make things parametric. So if we go back to, I can roll back a long way and show you everything. I like my sketches now in blue. Just primary blue stands for primary sketch in my own head. So that's what I do. You can just right click on a sketch and say show the actually we can't. No? What are we doing? I'm in a version. So let's go into a branch, a workspace, so that we can actually do what I was going to say there. Anyway, it can right click on a sketch and say edit the sketch appearance and choose whatever color. Primary blue works really well for me, so I do that for all of my primary sketches there. Same with these sketches here that I'm going to use for the chord of the profile, and we won't talk too much about the profiles because that is the subject of another thing on another day. Suffice to say that I'm using a method that we'll talk more about, which creates very smooth profiles for the profiles, unlike some of the other methods of data fitting through pretty noisy data. Anyway, so that first section here gives me a lofted surface. This is just a lofted surface, okay? And I name things as we go so that I can keep track. The skin, the CFD, I'm going to extract some information later on to do a CFD analysis, maybe not in today's YouTube demo, but the next portion of the wing was to create the spars and the leading edge and trailing edge. And the way that I did that is that I created some intersection curves between a plane, which is where at the spar's position. And you can see how everything is linked back to variables now. The position of this plane is linked to the variable, which is the percentage of spar position, or chord position, sorry, at 32.5% back from the leading edge. So then I create I'm using an intersection curve feature, which just intersects between the loft and this plane, leaving me two curves. Then I'm going to extend them a little bit because I want to extend them past the skin. I'm going to use this trick quite a bit because when you Boolean and slice and split things, often you want to overshoot just so that you make sure that you are cutting everything and not ending up with some small slivers. So these trim curve features, trim curve was done in the last half dozen releases or so. You can choose a curve, you can choose multiple curves at the same time, and I'm doing an extend by a certain distance. You can extend up to entity if you like, but I didn't like. I just wanted to extend it 5 millimeters past that end plane. Right. That gives me that. Now I'm going to use a frame feature actually. So a frame feature is useful because I can refer the frame feature to a profile. And maybe I've got a standard set of profiles for these balsa-wood kind of off-the-shelf things. And in fact, I drew the profile in a separate part studio. And the part studio for me was called Spar. It's a 6 by 4 millimeter rectangular section here. And the frame feature is just a convenient way to do it because I can control angle references. In this case, I'm not doing any mitering, but the frame feature's there. So I did the same thing for the lower spar, and then I did the same thing but with slightly different sections for the front and the leading edge and the trailing edge. Now, this is where it gets sort of real. The shape of this is going to be this sort of bullet nose type of thing, and the trailing edge is going to taper down. But the kit, and if I keep referring back to this thing in here, and there's a lot more information about how you build it. What you do is you glue it together with these square, rectangular kind of profile sections, and then you taper it down with a knife and sanding and board, right? That's how it's actually done. So I decided to replicate that as close as possible with all of the features that I'm doing here today. So rather than just go for the finish line, I will show you the steps along the way. Right. It also makes a parametric to the profile that I'm using here, and we'll come back to that again in a future episode. So once I've got the trailing edge, the leading edge, the spars, and the skin, it's time to build the ribs. And this is a fun bit because I get to use one of the patterns, the fancy patterns that I'm very fond of. In fact, there's a bit of a twist on it too as well. All right, so the first thing to do is to build a plane, which is on the end here, and I'm going to do an intersection curve between the plane, and you see it's sort of in from the end of by a certain distance from the end of the skin. From that intersection curve, and now let me just hide a few things here. No, okay. I'm going to build this intersection curve, as I said a few times, and then fillet to make a surface. All right. That's that surface there. And then I'm going to thicken it to make a rib. Now, all of these things, when you can dig into these, the rib thickness is a variable, and I will be changing that periodically just to make sure that things do keep parametrically hung together. You can see how I've overbuilt. I've deliberately built through the upper spar and the lower spar. We're going to do a lot of Booleans later on, as you can probably imagine. Probably my third favorite feature in all of Onshape is that. That's an absolute guess. But I really do like the Boolean, especially when it comes to adding offsets at the same time. More on that later. So what I did do, you can see here, I took that sort of nominal shape of the skin, to create the rib, and then I moved it out. I used a lot of move faith features quite a bit, and again, just to make sure that I'm overbuilding past this, so that I can do a split later on, and I know that it's going to be it's going to capture everything that I wanted to. So now that I've got one rib, it's time to pattern them, and I'm going to just pattern them, using a curve pattern. I'm driving that curve pattern with the front edge of the loft surface. So this is just basically the spine of the loft that was created automatically. So now I've got 15 instances, and this is exactly the number. I'm not making this a variable because it is the number from the plans, and I'm doing an equal spacing. Now this is a slight twist. It's a very, very simple. I think I've shown this custom feature I've used in the past. I've just done for my own convenience. It's a pretty easy hack that I've made, which is to show the pitch between things in the instances in the pattern. That's all I'm doing. The only thing I wanted to do here is just to show that. I'm not using the best fit, which is the other option which I'd added for myself, but that wasn't deemed necessary in this case. All right, so moving right along, the web caps, and these are the sort of front and little web caps that sit in front of the upper and lower spars. I did that using an interesting technique. I did a boundary surface using the top and bottom edges of the respective spars to create that surface, and did the same on the back side. There, if I hide and show, yep, there we go. They're the two boundary surfaces, and then I thickened them. And you can still see that I'm not doing any Booleans right now. I'm just overbuilding everything. This makes sure that I've got maximum parametric flexibility up to this point because I'm not worrying about those intersections. But now I start to worry about them. I'm going to do a Boolean using one of my special rolled my own kind of situations where I'm Booleaning features rather than bodies. And the tools in this case are the ribs. So the curve pattern that created all these ribs, and you can see those things highlighting in yellow as I flash on them. And that is going to act as a tool onto the front and rear of the spar caps. So the reason I did that, and I didn't have to do that because I'm not changing the number of ribs, but if in future I did want to change the number of ribs, then I wouldn't have to come back and adjust the Boolean because it would already be picking up those features. The next bit is to do a bunch of cleanups and a couple more Booleans. So now you can see that these Booleans have left me with individual pieces, individual parts. I'm highlighting that one there. If I isolate it, you'll see that I've Booleaned things away so that rather than one long piece which is impossible to install, it's not going to install that way. Now I've got all of my individual pieces, and the same thing for the ribs. You can see how the ribs have now had their cutouts made using Boolean, of course, to cut out the appropriate part of the spar and appropriate part of the front of the nose. Finally, I also Boolean the skin, or used the skin to split the front. Remember how the leading edge was this big square block. Now it's shaved down. So it's the equivalent of doing that kind of manufacturing feature, a manufacturing step where I would have got at my hobby knife and sandpaper and tapered this down perfectly. The next section is to do the diagonal ribs, and this one was, it took me a few different attempts or approaches. In the end, I did this way, where I built a sketch, and I'm using inferences or automatically just picking up intersections and piercings and things like that, so that if I do change the spacing, if I do change the pitch between this, it will update. I then created a surface using extrude, and I overbuilt again, and then I thickened that surface. So I've still got a single part here. If I go down to the part list, you'll see that there is something just at the moment called part 47. Then I start splitting. I do a few different split operations to split with the tapering or the profile of the skin, and also to keep these things as individuals I'm splitting on the back side of this spar cap and on the front of the trailing edge here. The last step is to Boolean them away from each other or from the ribs themselves, so that I end up with individual ones. Now the tapering is interesting because this is something also you do in situ or while you're putting it together. Obviously you've cut these things out of a flat balsa sheet, and then you just sort of by eye kind of taper that in before you glue it in place. But the CAD is perfect, as it should be, and as Onshape is really, really good at doing. This is a super clean model. I'm quite proud of how clean it really is. You know, there are no interferences at the end of the day here. Okay, so the tip is the next bit, and again, this was something that is very much a crafted. You do get a block of balsa like this, and you start cutting it away, and I'm using again a surface that I created from the top shape. I just did some kind of spline shape there, and then I split it away, leaving just that bit, and then I put a couple of fillets in. And now the fillets are just really the sandpaper fillets that you do until you get to the right shape. And in fact, they give you a little bit of a hint up here what the cross section HH and GG should look like. There's HH there, and there's GG back there. So I kind of followed it that way. The gussets, that's pretty simple stuff there. There's a couple of extra pieces of information. And then the center cladding, so the middle of the wing, because this is going to be mirrored across the middle, of course, has to be reinforced. And they reinforce this with, this skin. All right, so this skin is actually a 1.5 millimeter balsa sheet as well. And that's pretty much all the structural parts. The last bit is to add dihedral. So if you can see here, this is absolutely dead flat on the bench. The dihedral is going to lift things up using a transform. I don't want to lift those surfaces up, so that's why they haven't come with it. I've just transformed the solid parts into the 6 degree dihedral, and then done a couple of splits in the middle here, where I can just finish that off, add the plastic sheeting, which is going to be a heat shrunk skin, and then mirror that, and that is the wing. So it's a fun one, because I could, it's at 1600 at the moment, so let's go for 1, 2, 3, 4 millimeters, and rebuild this thing. And it doesn't take too long, and I can rebuild this with no errors, which is always good, and come back to 1600. So there are other ranges, and I won't go through them all. I can change the root chord, the spar position, the sweep angle. It's swept back at 5 degrees at the moment. The thicknesses of the sheeting, the ribs, the webs, the skin, all of those things are flexible. Anyway, so now we have a version which I've called my release candidate at the moment. So it's version 13 here, and that's pretty cool because I can just shut that down and go back to what I was working on here. So the wing, you can see here, comes from the version 13, the release candidate, and at the moment I've just placed it because I haven't done too much more. So let's hide that because we've perfected that. Let's have a look at the fuselage. The fuselage has got some cool modeling in it as well. So we're looking at the final assembly at the moment. I've nearly finished this. I mean, always have to have something more to do. So I've put in some mock-ups of the servos, and these are called NIRODs, which are, it's kind of like a cable guide. which is going to poke itself out the back here. Oops. And you can see here, this is one of my favorite Boolean tricks. I've Booleaned the cutout into the side of the fuselage, but with a clearance, right? So the Boolean feature has a clearance parameter option in it. And then the cable will come out of here, and this one's going to go to the rudder horn. The other one goes to the elevator horn, which is back here on the elevator. I've got some hinges in. You know, this is the assembly is basically complete. I've got my tow hook attachment and reinforcing plate in there. There's no more real structural or componentry to go in there. And if I hide the canopy, I need to put some fastening situation or dowels and screw in here for the canopy, but everything else is good. And as I said before, with the wing, in fact, that's going to be a factor of having high quality rendering turned on. So let's do that. And before I make a fool of myself, this is a very clean model, and these gussets are all different parts, right? This is exactly as the way that you would, that I had to build it. In fact, I've got some pictures over here just for a second. These are not my pictures, these are somebody else's, but this is kind of what it would look like in process. So hopefully it looks a little bit familiar, because this is the actual thing. Anyway, and because this is 20 plus years later, well, more than 20 years later, I have had to reconstruct it from memory and this single sheet of PDF. Right. So we're back in the assembly, and there's some interesting crafting that I want to talk about by going to first the main part studio, which is the fuselage part studio, and then I have this tricky but cool kind of side tangent one to explain something in a little bit more detail. So all the way back here, let's go back to here. And what I did do is I used that PDF and chopped them up into scaled sizes so that I could use these as reference. I then built all the planes. To show the planes, these are the bulkhead stations and critical stations here, like EE is something's happening there that we need to worry about. Right, so that is from these, and then I built the curves, and you'll see that I have done a bunch of sketches. Now if I show everything and then hide the planes, you'll see again I've used blue primary for my primary sketches, and the derived things, which are things like bridging curves, which I used here, and projected curves, which I used there. I always use red for those. That's just my own. Kind of looks cool as well, but it's also very handy to differentiate between something that is the primary, sketched reference to something else that's not, and it's been derived. From that, it was a matter of doing some lofts, and you can kind of imagine what that looks like. Let's show the fuselage skin. So the fuselage skin, and I think it's time to turn off the side. So you can see I've built the real reference skins here. This one here, which is an extrude, is going to help cut out the canopy, or that canopy on the front there. Right. And then, so I've also, typically what I do is these stages are all in different folders, feature folders, just so that I can keep a good track of things. Now, this next bit is the bulk of 84 features, so that's going to have a lot in it. So let's go to here and then hide some surfaces and see, and hide those sketches as well, and see what's going on. Right, so I've created the slabby sides and base and the canopy. Everything's very square because this is exactly how it. You cut these things out of flat sheets and pin them together with little dressmaking pins and glue them in situ that way. So what's inside though is a piece of interesting design. Now, if I hide a few pieces there, this next set of features was really interesting. And again, I've used the frame features, and these frame features here and here and up the top here and here, I'll isolate them. You can see how they reinforce the sides to the base, and the top to the sides as well. So again, the frame feature was very convenient for doing this. In particular, the idea to keep the the angle, the frame limits and the gusset profile. All of these things are built in. Now you could do this with a sweep, of course, but frame just made it very convenient so that I could change this gusset as simply as going over to the gusset profile part studio, which is where the gusset profile is, and I can edit that and have it reused wherever I needed to there. So that was convenient. Now there's a whole bunch of face replacements because we want to keep things. You can see how before the face replacements go in, now the face replacements are making things clean again. Right, so sometimes that is the best way to do things, especially up around this area here, which has got some reasonably tricky stuff going on, and so that it fits with the canopy. Now notice that everything's still very sharp, and the main crux of how I wanted to start this thing out was to focus on how on earth did I carve this out. And it does involve a fillet, of course, but it involves a little trick along the way. Now, let's go to here. I needed to put these rails for the servos, and I started on the rudder and the tail plane. Now, the formers are these sort of cross-sectional things here, and they've got some cutouts in them. Again, you can have a look in here. Yeah, there they are. So we can compare that to here. Oh, you can't really see. Let's compare it to here. Yeah, okay. So this is where these details come from. What are we doing? Then the control wires. Now the control wires I did with a series of mate connectors to define where they start and end. So if I show all those, you can see here I'm starting the mate connectors up near the servos and I'm ending them. Now I used a little override of the, I placed a mate connector sort of with respect to absolute space. And then I did a rotation around the y-axis so that I could point that outwards. And then I used a bridging curve. Now, a bridging curve is a super convenient way to do this because a bridging curve can take a start and end as a mate connector, like this one here. The only thing in the bridging curve it's saying is make it tangent starting with that mate connector and make it end it tangent to that mate connector. And then I can play with the magnitude a little bit, and I have. The end magnitude is now 0.7, just to affect the shape a little bit more. All right, so that's a really super way. And then I just swept down my control wires down those links of those bridging curves. Then I did that Boolean trick, and you see here I left a 0.25 offset around that. You can see that that's cool. Not much more. I just did a horizontal stabilizer and elevator. The elevator is connected with a little connector, piece of 80mm rod there, and then I just made a skid. Now this is the last thing. If you have a look on the plans over here, that's the last thing we had to do, which leads us to the final part, which is these fillets. Now, this is how you put it together at this point. You block it all together, and it's all sharp, and then you start to get out your sanding block, and you don't really get too much help. And I remember at the time it was kind of scary and rough to get this thing done, but it's a lot cleaner to do in CAD, that's for sure. Right, so to show you the tricky but cool bit, I'm going to go over to this part studio called Tricky But Cool and show you kind of the approach, and then this is the exact same set of features apart from the derive, which is just I've used to get some stuff in here. All right, so we've got the base, the side, and the two gussets, just for this purpose of this example. What I'm going to do is Boolean them all together to create a master part of that side, gusset, and base. We only need to do one side because it's symmetrical, and we can copy across later on. Once I've got this big Boolean thing in, I'm going to do a fillet. Now, this is a special fillet. Well, it's not that special. It's a variable radius fillet. I'm starting it at 8mm up this end. I'm doing, at this point here, another 8mm, so it's going to be constant here. And then I'm going to taper it all the way down to 1mm at this end. So there's the 1mm fillet here. Now, the reason that that is interesting is that this gusset finished here. So if I had put an 8mm fillet all the way down, I would actually have a huge gap. Actually, the gap would have started earlier, and it would not have. I couldn't have got the two 8mm fillets to fit in. So just like in real life, you just sort of taper this thing down until you get a nice, smooth but small fillet on the end. That's the way to do that. But the problem would have been now how to have done that with the these three separate parts. Right? Couldn't do that. So that's why I did the Boolean and did the fillet on the Boolean, and then I offset the surface by 0. I just basically copied these surfaces here and deleted the big blue Boolean body, leaving just this sheet body. All right, you can see where this is going, and I mirrored that to create two of them. Now, if I bring back all the parts, I can do a split, two splits. One using the surface from this side, and I'm going to operate on these three components, just using that as a split. You see it. And do the same thing on the other side. Now, you can see this orange, and I've colored it specifically so you can see the bit that's poking through. And this is good. This is fine. This is actually what there's plenty of meat through here with that big gusset. That's exactly why you put it there in the first place. You get this nice big fillet. You get this nice big fillet that runs down, and as the thing tapers out, you can see how that orange can't be seen anymore, and you end up with a design looking like that, which is exactly how I remember all these years later achieving it. I'm not sure if there's a good picture of that. I have a feeling that this particular builder didn't really do a great job in following the plans. It tells you all about it on other. You can see here, it's actually got some measurements that you can use. Yeah. Anyway, so that was the tricky but cool bit, and that is exactly those same features basically from these 7 features was what I replicated here. The Boolean fillet, to be and 2 splits. So that gave me this nice, and you can see the orange peeking through on this side in this particular case. And it has a nice finish at the tail, giving a little bit of space for the rudder there. All right, we're nearly there. There's a couple of fillets to go, and one of them is on the top there. One of them is somewhere else. Here. So the nose was another area that I used variable fillets for, and I did them separately because it was a little bit tricky to combine things at that sharp point. And there's again these two different or three different number of parts here being affected, and I was able to do this again with variable fillets here and here, which gives me the nice nose that I was looking for, kind of Concorde-ish in some ways. And then after that I was able to do the top canopy fillets, which again were variable. So they started out at 8, which is the same as that and the same as the bottom, but they taper down down here. So that led me just to finish with the tow hook, which is this thing in here. It's like a metal plate which covers this cutout and reinforces this cutout so that the tow hook can be launched or lined up in there. That is all of the modeling. We go back to the assembly. I've sort of lined up the wing, and let's see what. Now I haven't got the battery in here or the radio. I haven't got the battery or the radio in here yet, but what we could do is just show you the center of mass. It's a little bit far back at the moment. We have a reference on here which is sort of midway between the trailing edge, or some kind of mid-chord. That's where we want it to be, and so we'll be able to come back to this in future to make sure that we align this up appropriately. But yeah, it's going to need a little bit of ballast in the form of the battery and the radio receiver. But other than that, we're pretty much there. So all of this has been going on, and I buried the lead a little bit yesterday, or at least teased some of the changes we made with the version graph. And I've been doing the same kind of thing here, utilizing the version graph to some interesting effects. So I have a couple of branches coming out of version 7. You can see here the one we're in now, which is called nose shaping. And there was another one called One More Thing. And there was a major restructure which is still active, but you can see at this point here, earlier this evening, I did merge that back into, which became V7, okay? So these new merge lines were a couple of releases old, but there's something else that's new in this particular new release, which is protecting the workspace. And I've added this, I've turned on workspace protection for my main branch. And I'll show you what happens when we try and do a little bit of a merge here. So we've finished what we needed to finish here. Let's show all instances. Yep. So we're in a good state here. All right. And so from nose shaping, I'm going to try to merge. I'm going to go to main and saying workspace is enabled, protection is enabled. The only thing I can do here, I don't have any creation or editing tools at all. The only thing I can do by definition is to merge into this current workspace. So it tells me that we have 3 changes, 3 tabs down here that have had changes: the fuselage, the tricky but cool, and the assembly. So I'm going to replace the stuff in main with basically check in more, or merge, push my changes in from this nose shaping. So let's do that. All right, we've done that, and you can see how this merge line shows that has happened. Now, if somebody else was in this other branch called One More Thing, perhaps they were playing around with the fuselage, and they thought, okay, I'm going to do something with the nose here that's a little bit different. So, these are the changes that they'd made. They'd like this blunt nose, which might be a little bit safer and probably going to last a lot longer rather than that sharp nose. Anyway, so they have suggested these sorts of changes. Though they think, okay, I'm going to merge my changes back into main as well. So they're going to try and do that. This is very important message here saying that because workspace protections have been enabled, you can only merge changes when this workspace was actually basically clean. So because this branched off from a point which is prior to this latest merging, I can't just merge this one in, right? What I need to do is pick up the changes from this first before then merging my changes. And that's exactly how you do this in software and how we work our own software development process here at Onshape. This is a really, really brief and probably simplistic example, but it's going to ensure that this main branch always remains clean, and you don't have people doing last-minute merges that have the potential to break the other things that have been cleanly merged, such as the stuff that we did from nose shaping there. So, there's going to be a lot of different ways you can apply this, and we're not trying to force you into one particular way of working, but certainly this will be very, very familiar for people who come from have some software background, have used Git flow before, and that is going to make it very good. So now that we're in main, we've changed we've got our merges in from the nose shaping. We can cut a new version, and we can call this done. Good night.